It's episode 53 of Sport SA Daily Diary, and today we're chatting to Freedom Challenge race director Chris Fisher. Chris, g'day. How are you doing?
Cool. How's it, Adam? Yeah, good and you. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for joining us today. Chris, you're the race director of the Freedom Challenge. We'll get into the Freedom Challenge shortly, but tell us a bit about what it is to be a race director of a mountain biking race.
Yeah, well, it was a bit of a career change for me a few years ago, and it's, up until recently, it's been quite an exciting one. Now it's been quite a daunting one. Events is not exactly the place you want to be at the moment, but it's an interesting job, and it's got many facets to it, and it has its challenges and it has its quiet times, and then it's very stressful times, obviously, when events are happening. But it's, all in all, it's quite a unique sort of occupation, I suppose.
What is exactly the role of a race director for those that haven't been involved in mountain biking before?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it certainly depends on the event. You know, the Freedom Challenge is a fairly unique, or as the events part of it is a fairly unique kind of race where we have the same route every year. So, I mean, for many races, like the Epic would be, a lot of the work would be sort of renegotiating the logistics and the permissions and everything year on year and how it's all going to pan out. For us, we've got this very well-established route throughout South Africa, from one end of the country to the other, and so throughout the year, you are just, I mean, we're running tours along the route, but we're also having to maintain relationships with about 140 farmers, where the route passes through, and then you're just you spend most of your energy marketing the event to try and get people there and make sure that the experience they have is an authentic one and what they signed up for.
Yeah. So if we get on to the Freedom Challenge, the Freedom Challenge is a 2,150-kilometer race from Maritzburg to Paarl. Now, who in their right mind would ever do that?
Yeah, it's a good question, but no, it's the kind of thing that only appeals to a certain type of crazy person, I suppose. But, we live in an absolutely amazingly beautiful country, and there are parts of it that I think most South Africans have never even thought about visiting. And the Freedom Trail actually takes you to a lot of those undiscovered, beautiful, beautiful parts of the country. And it's a completely South African experience. You move through different landscapes, through different cultures, and you really do immerse yourself in the people, because you're staying at different sort of B&Bs or homestays along the way, and so it's for someone who really, lots of the people I think who enter the Freedom Challenge have done a lot of the stage races or the one-day races or other mountain biking or cycling events, and they've gotten to a point where they're kind of looking for something I think a little bit more soulful out of their mountain biking journey, and that's exactly what it is. I mean, we call it a race, but the reality is that there's only a crazy handful at the front end actually trying to go for records and that sort of thing. For most people, it's more about the journey and just taking on the challenge and taking it day by day and seeing if they can actually ride their bike from one side of the country to the other.
And Chris, how did you actually come up with the route? Did you have to ride that yourself, or did you Google it and then go? Or
it wasn't my brainchild. I've inherited this event a few years ago. I mean, I came across it as a rider. I mean, I initially rode it, but the route was thought up by a guy called David Wadilev, who he came up with it around about 2002, 2003. He planned it all, and he had this crazy idea where he wanted to sort of link the Two Oceans Marathon with the Comrade. So he kind of ran the two oceans and then just carried on running and ran all the way up to Maritzburg in about 43 or so, I think, days. It's averaging about 60 Ks a day or so. And so he came up with the route, but after he ran it once, he realized that no one is actually going to be crazy enough to run this thing again. So so then he decided, no, maybe a mountain bike would be more apt way of traversing the routes. And even though he wasn't much of a mountain biker, the next year he persuaded a couple others to, they ran the Comrades, and then basically the next day hopped onto bicycles and cycled down to Wellington, and then paddled the Berg River Marathon. So that's kind of how the route, how the start and finish points are determined. You know, the end of Comrades to the start of the Berg River, and it started as a challenge, called the Extreme Triathlon, where people did all three. But as the years went by and Comrades started shopping and changing their dates, you can see from your picture behind that you might know about that. The triathlon didn't really work as well anymore, and then people were sort of signing up more for the mountain bike element than the entire triathlon. So in about 2014 or 14, I think, the triathlon dropped away and it just became a standalone mountain bike race. But yeah, so I mean, David, the way he basically came up with the route is he drew a line from Pietermaritzburg to Cape Town, and then tried to follow the route as best as he could, linking together all staying off tar. Firstly, there's about 20 kilometers of tar in the entire 2,150 kilometers. Staying off tar and basically linking up all the most spectacular mountain passes and beautiful sort of reserves and landscapes you can imagine. So yeah, it really is. It was quite a brainchild and a bit ahead of its time. I think these sort of things, these crazy events, are becoming more mainstream now. But back in 2003, it was quite a out of the box thinking, I think.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I mean, Chris, you haven't only managed the event, you've also ridden the event with your wife. Firstly, tell us a bit about how that was, because I would imagine an event like that would test the strongest of relationships. And secondly, what sort of training is required to do a race like this? I mean, there's been guys, Martin Dreyer, the Payne brothers, etc., that have done the Epic and the Freedom Challenge, but there must be quite a difference between what you do in terms of training for the Epic compared to training for the Freedom Challenge.
Yeah, I mean, it's a different kind of event. To be honest, if you're fit enough to do the Epic, you'll be fit enough to do the Freedom Challenge. That's for sure, because, if you want to, you can do it in your own time. And, you've got 26 days to complete the entire route. And that is plenty of time for someone who can make the cutoffs in the Epic. But, firstly, my wife and I doing it together, that was, we had done a lot together up until that point. And that was just after we got married. It was kind of our honeymoon, a little bit left field for a honeymoon. But, yeah, I mean, it wasn't really testing on the relationship, I wouldn't say, because we didn't necessarily push ourselves, but we were just in it for the adventure and just took our time, rode mostly in the daytime. But we've done a lot of adventure racing together, a lot of canoeing together. So we're used to that sort of team element to the relationship. Definitely, we just really lapped it up and enjoyed it. But the training aspect, I would say, is, all you got to do is put in the time. It's about time in the saddle, and it's about time out of the saddle. That's something that most people don't realize, is how much you're actually going to end up carrying your bike on this route and lifting it up and over fences and that sort of thing. As I mentioned just now, the route was initially designed as a running route. So some of the passes aren't necessarily rideable, and some of the So you do have your bike on your back for a fair amount of time, and there's a lot of steep sections as well where you're pushing your bike. So the two big things that guys sort of forget about that come from a stage racing background is you're going to be carrying a backpack and luggage on your bike, even so somewhere in the region of 10 kilometers worth of say 10 kilograms worth of luggage. And then you're going to be carrying your bike a lot. So it's a good idea when training for this thing to actually put your bike on your back and hike up the mountain. When we were training for it, we'd do that up Table Mountain, and people look at you really strangely, but that's really is what's required if you want to get stronger at carrying your bike.
And Chris, I mean, from a management perspective, being the race director, I mean, it must be a huge logistical challenge. You got 19 support stations over the route, 17 interim stops. I mean, how do you actually manage all of this?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm lucky that this is all set up by David, like David back in the day, and we've taken it over. But I mean, just when we took it over, sitting down and making calls to all the landowners and the support stations took a matter of weeks. You know, there are so many people involved, and the farmers are generally just so gracious with allowing us to pass through their land. You know, there are a few that are more challenging than others. But as long as you close their gates and don't let any sheep escape, they're generally happy to let the mountain bikers through. Yeah, but it's always a challenge, you know. And so you've got those 19 support stations, and even the interim stations, people can stop and sleep and eat and get a meal if they want. So if you're going for a faster strategy, you know, it's tricky because you've got to work out which support stations you'll be stopping at and which interim stations you'll be stopping at and how your strategy might work. But yeah, I mean, it's just a matter of treating the support stations like the most important part of this race, because that's really what they are. And that's where the traversing permission comes from, is using the local businesses along the way, supporting local communities wherever you can, and just trying to give back to the trail wherever you can. And yeah, it's as long as we stay friendly with them, they hopefully let us pass through.
And Chris, I mean, it's not like many other events in terms of no GPS navigation is allowed. The guys are essentially riding with a paper map and a compass. I mean, that in its own right has its own challenges, but absolute rewards.
No, for sure. I mean, you know, there's over the years, there's been a few complaints about the lack of GPS, and these days with GPS becoming quite normal in many multi-day events and even single-day events, guys are getting very used to riding with GPSs, and then when they find out, oh no, this is old school map and compass, it takes some people by surprise. But I mean, that said, whenever the topic comes up of wanting to get rid of the navigation aspect of it, all the guys who have come before will be flat out against it, because they all admit that it really adds to the adventure. You know, if you know where you're going all the time, then you don't. It's a little bit too easy, I suppose. But I mean, I think the reason that came about is, firstly, when the route was started, a GPS on a bike was a lot less common. You know, you would be carrying a big sort of unit that would chew through batteries, and they're not the technology wasn't available like it is today. And I think it was largely modeled around the concept of adventure racing, you know, where you also not allowed any GPS navigation tools. And it really, really does add to the adventure of it. And I know it puts people off a little bit, but so many people who have been put off by it, but then just, you know, decided to give it a go anyway, and taught themselves to navigate and taught themselves to use a compass, will attest to just how rewarding it is finding your own way to where you should be going. And the times when you are lost just add to the challenge and make it that much more rewarding to get to the end goal, I think. So it's not something we're going to change in a hurry. When I took over the Freedom Challenge, it was a prerequisite that the GPS ban or the map and compass navigation would stay. And it's something, I mean, coming from an adventure racing background, it was something I was also very happy with. But on that note, we have just introduced a new event that will incorporate portions of the Freedom Trail, but will also use a GPS, just so the guys who are totally against traditional navigation will at least have a small opportunity or glimpse into just how beautiful and how special the Freedom Trail is. So they'll only get to experience a few hundred kilometers at a time, but we're hoping that guys who do come onto the trail in the new event called the Freedom Circuit, which is this one up here, will at least be inspired to maybe come back without the GPS and give the real thing a go.
Yeah. And I mean, you talk about seeing the most beautiful parts of the country. the race is done in winter when it's bitterly cold. There's snow, which obviously makes it a lot more beautiful. Um, I mean, that again must add to the logistical challenges. This year, though, it's going to be in October. Do you foresee that there may be a bigger uptake in terms of race entries?
I mean, the race entries for the winter one were pretty much sold out. So I don't know if we could take many more, but obviously lots of guys can't do it in October now, so they'll be rolling over the entries, or they want the authentic winter experience, so they'll be rather rolling over the entries to 2021. But I do think the October date would be quite enticing to many, but with current sort of unknowns all around coronavirus, I don't think many people have. It's an expensive race to enter. And I don't think many people are looking at sort of those sorts of luxuries or splurges at this stage, and especially not knowing if they can travel. So we hope that many people will, but at the same time, we might not even be able to put the events on. So we have to keep realistic about it and keep within the laws and the rules of what we are and are not allowed to do. But just to touch on why the race is in winter, I think the dates initially come from linking the comrades and the Berg. So I mean, that's why it's through the middle of winter. But in hindsight, I don't know if the route could actually be, it's really well suited to be where it is, because there would be a lot of river challenges if it was any sooner, with high level rivers especially in KZN. And then it gets extremely hot in the Karoo and other parts of the route through the middle of summer. So, the winter definitely adds an element of adventure, and you need to carry a lot of extra gear. And there's a good chance that you're going to be riding through snow at some point, going over Swartberg Pass or, over Nordea's Neck Pass. There's often snow on those parts. So, it really does add to the adventure, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Chris, I've chatted to Nigel Payne a bit about the Freedom Challenge. He's obviously done it a few times, and he's told me quite a few comical stories where he's sort of riding along and he's half falling asleep, telling his brother, Adrian, no, I need to stop, I'm going to sleep. And Adrian saying, no, go on. And then he just kind of falls off his bike fast asleep. You must have heard quite a few comical stories. Have you got any specific ones that you can remember that you can share?
No, I mean, that sort of thing I think happens, especially with guys who are pushing the boundaries. Nigel and Adrian last year tried to, push through quite a few nights, and they ended up going around in circles at times, and he's just sort of just falling over and sleeping under a bush. But it happens a lot, It's also coming from an adventure racing background. I've heard of quite a lot of people sort of seeing things in the bushes due to lack of sleep. Once you haven't slept for a few nights, your brain starts playing tricks on you. It's quite bizarre how that all transpires. And then, last year with Martin Dreyer trying to break his own record, he had a bit of an incident. He was also a little bit ill, but he had an incident where, he didn't even realize that he had passed out, and he found himself at the bottom of a bank with a farmer, I think, shouting at him. They had driven past and seeing his bike lying in a bush. But I mean, it can be dangerous at times, and some people say they need to train for sleep deprivation, but I don't know if there is actually any way to train for that sort of thing. Yeah. It's just keeping as strong as you can in the mind, and just trying to push through the sleep monsters, they call them, is when these little guys jump on your back and are just tugging at your eyelids to stop and have a doze.
And Chris, obviously the record holders, the Dreyer family, I mean, they are immense. Martin in 10 days, Jeannie in 12. How much more can be taken off?
Well, you see, the tricky part about this event is there's school fees to be paid. So you can't expect to come and break a record in your first year. It's highly unlikely. I mean, I think the fastest novice time is Tim Dean in 14 days and something. So you compare that to an overall record of 10 days, and that's taken Martin, I think he's done 5 full race across South Africa's now. So I mean, it's taken him, it took him at least a couple times of riding the route, not under extreme race conditions, to learn about what he needs to expect and the sort of the route and the navigation side of things before he could actually have a proper go at the record. And to be honest, it's going to take something pretty special to break both of those records. You see these guys doing these ultra cycling events over the world and going really fast, but they are just, they've got a GPS attached to their bike and they're just following the dot, really.
Yeah.
But there's guys who have come close. There's obviously Alex Harris, who's I think Martin's long-time rival in this race and has held the record before, organizer of the Manga, and he's back this year to have another go. And then there's Bruce Hughes, who's also entered this year, and I think one of the only other people at this stage who has the experience and would be capable of going as fast as Martin. So Bruce has moved to New Zealand recently. He's doing his MBA over there, and he was really at his second attempt at the race. He rode it casually with his dad the first time around, and then in the second attempt he was very competitive up until the point where he also fell ill. So he's a very strong cyclist, youngster. So I'd like to see what he could do, having another real go at it. And I think maybe if Bruce lines up, who knows, maybe Martin will come back in defense. So having Martin and Alex and Bruce all on the start line would be the right recipe to see what the real fastest humanly possible time is, I think.
Absolutely, that would be one to watch. And just in closing, Chris, there's no financial reward for the race. It's really just the reward is doing the race and finishing it.
No, exactly. I mean, every person who finishes gets the same reward, and your prize is a traditional Basotho blanket. The very colourful blankets you'll see the traditional Basotho's wearing up in the highlands, Lesotho and Maluti mountains, and that blanket is seen. The young herd boys will wear a grey blanket while they're herding their sheep and their cattle in the hills as a youngster, and then as they pass through into manhood, they are given their traditional Basotho blanket, which is the colourful one, and it's sort of seen as a rite of passage or a passage into manhood. And I mean, that's kind of the symbolism around getting your blanket for finishing the race across South Africa as well. And whether you win the race or you come last or finish it in the allotted 26 days, everyone is awarded their traditional Basotho blanket. And I think, after having done the race, you realize that it's not an event or a race a journey that really requires a prize as such, or a first prize or a second prize, because it is probably an equal challenge to everyone that does the event. And I think that's quite fitting that, you do it more for yourself than for anyone else. It's a journey more for yourself and your own experience. And I think at the end of the day, that's probably reward enough. And even speaking to the racers about this, they don't want prize money. For them, it's about the honors, the honor of being the fastest to do it, and the challenge they set for themselves, really.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Chris, it's been awesome chatting to you today on Sport SA Daily Diary. Thank you very much for your time and your insight into the race, and good luck with the October version. It's going to be an interesting one to see.
Yeah, no, for sure. It'll have its own challenges. But thanks very much for having us, and I hope to see you on the trail at some stage.
Yeah, absolutely. Why not? Thanks very much, Chris.
Look out for tomorrow's episode of Sport SA Daily Diary, where we'll be chatting to Springbok World Cup winning scrum half, Herschel Jantjies.